Hello and welcome to Leader Talk, the CNN IBN series where we talk leadership mantras with icons from the world of sport and from the corporate world. Joining us now, two very special guests. Very privileged to be joined by the West Indian cricket legend, holder of the world first class and test batting record, Brian Charles Lara, and Rohinton Ronnie Screwvala, founder of UTV and also now a philanthropist in his new avatar. Appreciate both of you joining us here on Leader Talk. Brian, I'm going to start with the idea of what is leadership in sport, given that sport is very fiercely individualistic at one level.
Well, obviously there are different types of sport. Lawn tennis, you're mainly playing by yourself against an opposition. But in my field of cricket, it's still very important to have a very good leader. And there are characteristics that makes a good leader. I mean, maybe similar in the business world where man management, being a motivator, leading by examples, these are some of the characteristics that makes a leader. And I don't think there's any difference between sport, especially team sport, and business.
The reason I'm asking you this is, in a way, is that you were the one shining light for a West Indian team that struggled through much of your career. You weren't privileged to be part of the great West Indian sides of the 70s and 80s. Did that make the entire task of leadership more difficult because you were part of a team that was struggling even as you were this iconic player? Was it about Brian Lara or was it about West Indies doing better?
It was definitely about West Indies doing better, but as an individual and a skilled individual and initially making the team as a batsman, I had to express myself, and I always wanted to express myself. I always wanted to be the best player in the team. That, contrasting with what a leader is required to do, sometimes created a little bit of a problem for me. In the decline of West Indies cricket, I think we needed a leader that was going to show the example, yes, but was also able to manage his team. And I felt that I lacked a little bit of that. But it was an onerous task, in such a team with less skilled individuals like, say, what we had in the 70s and 80s.
I'll come back to that. You're being very honest that man management perhaps wasn't the strongest quality that Brian Lara had. Man management, critical, you believe, to being a good leader. How important is it when you're building a corporate and you really are a first generation entrepreneur, building an organization from bottom up? How important was man management? Was that the critical factor? Was it simply, again, as an individual to lead from the front?
I'd say lead from the front, and I think I kind of take up from where Brian left off, which is really you've got to be able to lead from the front, because when you're actually a first-generation entrepreneur or you're starting an organization that's not a multinational, leading from the front is very, very critical and important. And I think building a team and being brutal about that team is about the next one. I think when we get involved and we start up, we're not as brutal about our team management afterward.
Define for me, what do you mean by brutal about team management? Are you saying that you've got to be ruthless in a sense in running a business?
I think brutal and ruthless mean the same thing, and yeah, I think it's an evaluation, and you're doing both a disservice if you're not, actually, because if the person is not the right person for the job, it's going to slow down a lot of people. As an organization grows, leadership is that much at the top of the pyramid, has got a lot more accountability for really performing.
Because the flip side of ruthlessness may be empowering, delegating. How do you see that as contrarian?
I don't see that actually as contrarian. I think the question of being empowered is very, very critical, and that's even more reason why you need to be brutal in your evaluation, because after you empower, if the person has not risen to that occasion, or you yourself, so as a leader you've got to first question yourself, because back to lead from the front.
Leading from the front. I mean, you led from the front when you captained West Indies. You did remarkably well as a batsman, even when you were captaining West Indies, particularly in the last phase of your career. But it didn't seem to inspire the others to perform at the level that a Brian Lara did. Is that simply because they were not good enough? Was it simply because, as you said, you were not able to manage them well enough? Or was it simply about the fact that at the end of the day, a leader can only do so much in a team sport?
Well, I believe that leading by example is important, yes, but in team sport, where you have individuals that make up the fabric of a victory, you need to motivate them as well. I was not a bowler, I was not a wicket keeper. I didn't have 20 hands in the field to take all the catches. And yes, you'd go out and score a double century, but the guys might not be motivated to get the team out twice. So in that aspect, I'll say man management, which affected my ability to motivate all the players, caused a little bit of a problem in terms of searching for victories. And Yes, it's in a great environment in terms of, say, for instance, Clive Lloyd in the 70s and the 80s, and delegating to Michael Holding or Andy Roberts to take the wickets, and to Sir Vivian Richards and Gordon Ridge. When you have a team like that, it's quite easy to delegate and quite easy to leave everybody to their own, and you're going to produce a victory. They said that, anybody, my mother told me that her aunt could have captained that team and win in the 70s and 80s. So there's a bit difference in terms of different timing when the West Indies played in the 70s and 80s, the quality of the team compared to the 90s and the early part of the 20th.
No, I'm just wondering whether, to take your point forward, Brian, is a captain only as good as the team? That, at the end of the day, if you're building a team, whether in the corporate world or the sports world, unless you have those talented individuals, however much you try to lead from the front, however much you try and inspire them, you're not going to reach your goal. I mean, Clive Lloyd was able to do so because he just had these wonderfully talented individuals all over the place.
I still feel, though, that you have some responsibility in terms of your team. The inexperienced part of your team, as a leader, you have to try to coax these players into getting it right. And I just wondered if Sachin Tendulkar, like myself, the expectation that you have of people that are playing international cricket, you think that, you've gotten to this level, you should take some personal responsibility. And sometimes that's not the case. Not everybody will have the ability that you have or you see through your eyes, and you have to lend that support. And in hindsight, I believe that there were a lot of individuals that I should have been up there with them and maybe a bit stronger in my leadership, or a little bit more sympathetic, and maybe I would have gotten a lot more out of them.
That's interesting because I saw an interview of yours, Ronnie, where you were asked, do all good managers make good leaders? And you gave a very simple answer, no.
Yeah.
Do you believe there's a difference between an individual who's a good manager and who's a good leader? And tell us what you believe is the difference.
Well, I think just as your question on team is not a bestowment that comes from heaven. So at leadership, how you select them, sometimes how you mentor them, how you bring them to be collaborative, these are all elements that have to come from leadership. So it's a mix and match of those.
But the talent aspect, can you work out a great film if you didn't have the best talent, the best people in the best place? How important is just finding the right talent and identifying the right people to build a strong team?
It's an ongoing process. It's an iterative process. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's really the fit of people within an organization. Sometimes the person could be absolutely perfect, but the culture is not right, or the momentum is not right. Some people have a more macro picture. Some people have a micro picture. It's actually the leadership that can blend all of that and assess it.
And I'm just wondering whether individuals are born to lead. Some individuals, people say, are born leaders. In cricket, Mike Braley was supposed to be a great captain, even though he was a very average batsman. Do you believe that leadership is born, or do you believe that over time you become better as you grow and mature as an individual, even in the world of sport?
I think the second choice. I believe that you can grow into becoming a good leader. And totally agree that your best player is not necessarily your leader. In my case, and maybe in a Sachin's case as well. Take, for instance, a Mike Braley. He might be able to relate to players at a lower level and understand, the different things that they're going through, the negatives, and get them to do what he wants them to do.
I'm just wondering, first-generation entrepreneurs, a lot of first-generation entrepreneurs that we've spoken on Leader Talk, they seem to have a fire in the belly. Was there a goal that you'd set as a first-generation entrepreneur? Was there that fire in the belly that within the next 5 years I've got to make $100 million company? Was that all there?
Sometimes hunger is much more of a goal than a goal itself, actually, and I think that kind of fuels it much better. So I think that's what it would be, and you keep going at it from that perspective. It's a momentum that happens on its own.
And but in your case, was it also about reinvention, constantly looking for new opportunities? I mean, is that critical for being a successful entrepreneur, to constantly be on the lookout for new opportunities for wealth creation?
I think restlessness is a word that comes to mind. It doesn't mean, it's not a negative, it's not like you're restless all the time, but there is a sense of being disruptive, constantly questioning the constant in that context. And I think that makes a big difference.
How important is it for any leader, whether in sport, to constantly be confident even in tough times? Would you get depressed, for example, when you found that the West Indian team was losing matches which you thought they'd win? And would you then withdraw into a shell or get angry or reflect, where you stood when things were not going well?
I was very optimistic, and even though we were down in the doldrums majority of the time, I'd find a way to try to explain how we're going to get out of it. It was in New Zealand, 1999, and immediately I called and said, I need to take a break. You need to have somebody else. So during my reign, even though it was not that successful, I was very optimistic of us getting some victories, doing something good.
In the early years, when there were difficult times, did you feel that maybe I'd be much better doing a nice 9-to-5 job?
No, Rajdeep, I think you don't have a choice. Once you've gotten into that, you really don't have a choice. Everyone's looking to you for solutions. I think the only thing I would use as my sort of place was to always recalibrate and figure out what's my worst case scenario in terms of a crisis and start acclimatizing myself to that. And once that happened, I think the solutions start coming in.
That's interesting. Let's take a break at this point. Lots more to talk with Brian Lara and Ronnie Screwvala, their mantras for successful leadership. You're with Leader Talk, and we're talking to Brian Lara and Ronnie Screwvala. You know, Ronnie, you've decided to, in a sense, move out of media and entertainment and actually do new things with your life. Is that, again, part of reinvention, restlessness, as you called it earlier, that's critical to be an entrepreneur? You even are investing heavily in philanthropy, an area which in India generally entrepreneurs stay away from.
Well, I think two things. Firstly, I'm just surprised at the level of surprise everyone has that I'm kind of moving out and somebody can move and look at doing something so radically different. Specifically when it comes to philanthropy, I think overall as a nation, we haven't been. This is not about giving, it's actually about executing. And I think we've got a lot of statistics where everyone says people don't give in this country. I think they actually give a lot in kind and they give a lot in labor. There are incredible amount of people that I'm being discovering in the last 1 year that actually give a lot of their time and effort. That's not quantifiable to GDP levels in terms of contribution. But it's a phenomenal ecosystem out there. Second, what choice do we have again there? Because when you're looking at the youth and you're looking at the next, if 70% of whatever we're doing here is in rural, how are you going to fix any ecosystem or be one of the top 3 economies in the world?
So you're moving from media and entertainment into the world of agriculture, which is, you're planning to move into that, which are two vastly different worlds. But you believe the leadership required is the same, the entrepreneurial skills required are the same?
I think so, because you look at scale, you look at building brand, you look at taking something and sort of glamorizing it to a certain extent that can bring in a lot more people. You look at evangelizing it, and then you'll find the levels kind of meet quite often.
You know, Brian, on the other hand, after retirement, you become the brand ambassador for Trinidad and Tobago. Is that, again, challenging in a way? Is this part of the reinvention of Brian Lara also?
Yeah, most definitely. It's also a passion. It's not something that, was just handed to me. It's something I wanted to do in tourism and in sport, to see my country, Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the West Indies, and promote them and get them out. You ask a lot of people where Trinidad and Tobago is, they tell you Africa. They don't understand exactly where it is. And I felt that what I've experienced in different countries around the world, I would like people to come out to Trinidad and Tobago, experience it. We've got a lot to offer.
Do you see yourself as a leader in that sense of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Because you are perhaps the most recognized face of your country. Do you see yourself having a role perhaps which goes well beyond the world of cricket and brand ambassador, maybe even to politics tomorrow? Public life?
I was hoping you're not going to say anything about politics, but I like giving back, and I believe that I can give a lot more back outside of the political arena. We've got 1.3 million people in Trinidad and Tobago, sport, tourism on the whole, and even just encouraging the youngsters. It's very difficult sitting behind a desk as a minister of sport or a minister in any other field. So I like being a little bit in the background, and I don't feel all leaders have to wear the armband or have to be the guy in the top position. I believe there are a lot of leaders inside an organization that play a very, very important part.
If I were to ask both of you, and Ronnie, you can take this first, is there a leader you admired all these years as you were building these companies, building your brands? Was there a role model you had, someone who you felt, I'd like to be like him?
I'd love to say yes, but actually the answer is no. And I think over the last 10 years, technology has kind of democratized that so heavily that icons actually in the younger generation today, if you ask people if they got icons, it'll become less and less as you go forward. And if they're there for a year and a half, which really doesn't mean that they're instrumental in that. But I think in different patches, in terms of ethics, sometimes in terms of building credibility and trust, sometimes in the level of detailing that somebody's gone into, those are all the sort of different motivations that come your way.
Because I read somewhere you said the political leader you admire the most was Nelson Mandela.
But that is actually much more for what he stood for, and the ability to be able to bring that and inspire. Because inspiration is what everyone finally admires at the end of the day. You need to be inspiring.
Is there someone who you look upon, Brian, maybe even in your cricket career, who you saw as a role model, someone I'd like to be like?
Well, majority of the good leaders, there's Sir Frank Worrell, Clive Lloyd, and you talk in politics, you talk about Nelson Mandela. These are individuals that I've read about and gotten an understanding of what they did. But in terms of a feel and an experience, it was very tough because I felt that each leader, in hindsight now, lacked a certain part or a certain ingredient that was necessary. But the one person I'd love to give another chance would be Courtney Walsh, because he tactically was not the best. But his humility and what he stood for and the things that he did, and as I said in hindsight, now looking back at it, I think that he played a great leadership role in the background, and I'd love to maybe, he is my favorite cricketer.
You mentioned a word, the humility. How important is it for a leader to be humble through all the trials, the tribulations, the triumphs, the failures? Important to remain rooted to the ground.
In sport, it's very important that you keep an even keel, even if it's the lowest you've been or even if you're on top of the tree, and humility is a big part of that.
You described your leadership style once as participative. What does that mean?
When you're empowering, it's a big word. And unless you actually have people who have a complete buy-in, who are part of the ideation process, it's going to be quite difficult. So you actually really need to have an open door thought process. You need everyone to feel egalitarian in a true sense, not in a hypocritical sense. And when everyone says, I think humility is a sort of a word that for most people actually means arrogance, because it's the most misused word. But actually the true test is, if you're curious, and if you stay curious in life, if your curiosity level is high, and if you're a genuinely good listener, that's the only time when you're really humble. Because everything else is just...
Is that important, being a good listener, to being a good leader? Because you're going to get lots of advice all the time, and you must have got lots of advice over the years. How do you separate the good from the bad advice?
Leadership skills require a phenomenal scanner to see the good from the bad, or the relevant from the irrelevant, as the case may be. But yeah, I think you're never going to learn unless you're a listener.
And also keep the sycophants away, possibly.
Yeah, well.
Which you always get as you climb up the ladder. But look, if there was one leadership lesson, Brian, that you would give to it, not everyone is going to be gifted with the talents that you had, or Tendulkar had, the greats of our time. But is there a lesson you'd like to give a younger generation?
I believe it's definitely in man management, especially in a team scenario, business, sport. Being able to embrace all that await you. Not everybody is going to have the same skill level, but everybody can have the same amount of commitment, and it's getting that into one, bottling it, and making sure that you move forward.
30 seconds, Ronnie. If you had to give one lesson to someone who wants to be the next movie mogul of this
I think
country.
just in any part of business, I think there's too much made of the word failure. I think that is the one single element that I think people need to... Failure is a comma, it's not a full stop. And therefore, staying the course is the true measure of success. Because if you don't have resilience, and you don't stay the course, and you look at every failure as more than a speed bump, you're finished.
At the end of the day, both of you have been remarkable successes. Ronnie Screwvala, Brian Lara, thank you for joining us on Leader Talk.
Thank you.